blown. And in this part of the discussion, we are going to be talking about how they diagnose people in their narrative about conspiracy theories. Again, we are talking about conspiracy theories, and this is the Diagnose chapter of that. Be sure to check out the other chapters or sections of this talk. Let's give a little overview here about all of the different sections, what we've talked about, what we have to come. So redefine, identify, diagnose, that's what we're on now. Double deal, dictate, and disregard are the different sections. And let's begin then with this section here. So diagnosing, similar to identity, they're going to, instead of a violent extremist and a jihadist, white nationalist, racist, all of these identifying labels, here they're going to talk about basically lunatic, crazy person. They're not going to use the labels, though. They're going to use the pathologies to essentially broadly pathologize conspiracy theorists. So it follows the identification aspect logically. So we got experts basically that are being trotted out to psychoanalyze conspiracy theorists. And you're going to get things like schizotypy, delusion, narcissism, paranoia, personality traits like binarism, dispositional distrust, yada, yada, yada. And let's take a look at some examples then. So we looked at this before, Karen Douglas's interview, and she says here that, quote, "We argue that people are drawn to conspiracy theories in order to satisfy or in an attempt to satisfy three important psychological motives. The first is epistemic motives. In a nutshell, epistemic motives really just refer to the need for knowledge and certainty, and I guess the motive or desire to have information. And when something major happens, when a big event happens, people naturally want to know why that happened. They want an explanation, and they want to know the truth, but they also want to feel certain of that truth." Well. So she's talking about conspiracy theories and the fact that people are drawn to them because of this particular motive. But look how this motive applies to any source of information that can do the same thing, that can explain why something happened, that can give knowledge and certainty. This could easily explain why people are drawn to media narratives, right? Because they always are talking in authoritative tone and claiming to have, the knowledge of the most important news events at any given time. And of course, that's completely untrue. They hide a lot. That's part of their agenda. But anyway, you see how that can be applied to mainstream narratives as well as conspiracy theories. So the second motive is existential, and she says it refers to people's needs to be or feel safe and secure in the world that they live in. Again, a mainstream narrative can be geared or can supply that need, or at least that perceived need. Okay, so she's presenting all these double-edged swords. Okay, here again, the final set of motives, social motives, refer to people's desire to feel good about themselves as individuals and also feel good about themselves in terms of the groups that they belong to. Oh, well, here, her audience are people that belong to a group that feel good about themselves because they're sitting back here as the psychologist psychoanalyzing the conspiracy theorist. The conspiracy theorist is on the couch here, right? So you're taking the view of the expert and you're kind of psychoanalyzing. It's think about it. It's pretty potent kind of. Now, I don't think she's doing this. I do believe she believes everything she says is true, but she doesn't see the whole narrative the way I see it. Anyway, She goes on to say, and I guess at the individual level, people like to feel well. They like to have high self-esteem. They like to feel good about themselves. And potentially one way of doing that is to feel that you have access to information that other people don't necessarily have. And the media, their function is to make you feel that way all the time. Like, we have the, inside scoop. We have the top story for you today. This is, super important. And they kind of make people feel, like news is a virtue. Watching news is a virtue, and the right kind of news. They kind of associate that with, you being intelligent and smart, and, these slick media companies are all into that kind of propaganda. So again, she presents all these double-edged swords, and then here talking about narcissism, the need for uniqueness, narcissism associated with conspiracy theorizing. Here's something going on here, building a comprehensive profile of conspiracy thinkers. Again, the conversation. Consistent with previous research, we found that one major predictor of conspiracy belief was schizotypy. Sounds like schizophrenia. That's a constellation of traits that include a tendency to be relatively untrusting, ideologically eccentric, and prone to having unusual perceptual experiences, e.g., sensing stimuli that are not actually present. What? But, like, hallucinations? No. Hold on. It sounds like he's talking about hallucinations. Let me read that again. Ideologically eccentric. Okay. Unusual perceptual experiences like sensing stimuli that are not actually present. What does he actually mean there? It's not actually what he's saying there. If you read on, you find out that what he's actually talking about are, so they are more likely, in the article it says, people that are more likely to say that non-human objects like triangle shapes moving around on a computer screen were acting intentionally as though they were capable of having thoughts and goals they were trying to accomplish. So it's not really people having hallucinations. They're in a study, they're shown, like it said, triangles moving around on the screen, and they're asked, is there motivation to this, or is this random? And it's supposed to be, random, but people are saying, well, I see motivation, so they're conspiracy theorists if they do that, but they're not hallucinating, as it kind of sounds. He kind of makes them sound crazy in this article. In the related, there's a related study backing this article, and that study is Something's Going On Here, Psychological Predictors of Belief in Conspiracy Theories, Joshua Hart. And so again, he diagnoses conspiracy theorists as relatively untrusting. Okay, not bad in and of itself, on a spectrum between relatively trusting and relatively untrusting. Ideologically eccentric, which could just mean not always believing in the mainstream narrative, concerned about personal safety, who isn't, and prone to perceiving agency in actions. That agency in action, that's what they were talking about. What he phrased here in the article as sensing stimuli that are not actually present, which makes it sound really crazy. Of course, this association with schizophrenia, that kind of lingo, is kind of telling in this article. And get this, he goes on to talk about conspiracy theorists are prone to perceiving agency in actions and profundity in bullshit. Profundity in bullshit. Wow. So think about how negative that is, and perhaps inappropriate. It's surprising to see that language in a scientific article. And he goes on to say again, bullshit receptivity is another name for that he thinks he's found in conspiracy theorists. It's really, of course, conspiracy theorist and all that has been turned into basically an ad hominem in most cases. It's a label that's tossed around willy-nilly as an ad hominem. So this article is really bullshit if you look into it. But what does he mean by profundity and bullshit? Well, in the article, it states that conspiracies had distinct cognitive tendencies. They were more likely than non-believers, or conspiracists had distinct cognitive tendencies, more likely than non-believers to judge nonsensical statements as profound. For example, wholeness quiets infinite phenomenon. Okay, so if you heard that phrase and you thought it was kind of profound, then you're receptive to bullshit. Well, that's ridiculous. You could just be, a poet or a musician and say, hey, that gives me that's pretty profound, man. Whether or not somebody intended it to be, you can always find profundity in many different things. Many different things can inspire profundity. So this whole article is bunk, but it gives you an example of how there's kind of this move to diagnose not just conspiracy theorists, but they're using it politically. And in this article, is Trump a conspiracy thinker? So after all that setup, schizotypy, and maybe are they hallucinating? I mean, wow, this sounds really crazy the way he's talking about it. And then he gets to Trump. So you see kind of what I think is kind of this Trump derangement syndrome that really infected academia, it infected the media, it infected a lot of people. Just this over-the-top hysteria over Trump when basically he's a buffoon. Don't get me wrong, I don't like the guy, but he was pretty much no different than any other president. Slightly better on some things, but worse for a lot of things too. So, but pretty typical as far as U.S. presidents go. So anyway, there you have it, diagnosing. There's plenty more examples in the mainstream narrative. And to kind of sum up here, I want to talk about the fallacy of composition. This idea that you can pluck, and this goes with identifying too, you pluck certain members out of a large group. Again, you can define all of us as conspiracy theorists. So to pluck small members of the group and to talk about the whole group in terms of those individual people, that's called the fallacy of composition. So saying something is true from the whole using a fact that is true of just a part. So they don't necessarily make this in these articles, but what they do is they leave people open to making it. It's really a strong invitation for people to make that because of, you get, instead of being a small subset of basically all people, you seem to associate exclusively in a lot of these articles. It seems like an exclusive association with negativity more broadly, but in the context we've been talking about, crazy pathologies and extremist ideologies, identities, and that sort of thing. The most malevolent and disturbed people are being associated with conspiracy theorists. This caricature, they're building a caricature of a conspiracy theorist, and it has little to no resemblance to the majority of people who, on an everyday basis, we all entertain alternative theories, sometimes multiple theories for any given event. We might have multiple alternative theories that can be at play at any given time. There's nothing wrong with theories. It leaves room, a theory by definition leaves room for doubt. Even scientific theories, which are grand, super well evidenced things, they are still only theories because they leave that room for doubt. And that's what we need to do. We need to balance our ability to keep an open mind with our skepticism. We're going to talk about that later. But it's really disturbing, the psychoanalysis too, if you think about it, because it kind of isolates people. This identifying and psychoanalyzing, if someone is I hate to say it, but if someone is a conspiracy theorist, If somebody engages with conspiracy theories, then this negative banter kind of isolates them sociologically. So it can create sort of pathologies through isolation. It can lead to this narrative. I think is very damaging in a lot of respects, and this is one potential way. They can be exacerbating people who are isolated and thus may become perhaps violent. Instead of recognizing conspiracy theories neutrally for what they are and engaging in debate and discussion and bringing facts and light to bear, not essentially what they are pushing for is censorship, okay, ultimately. And we're going to see more of that later. So another aspect to diagnosing here is we can turn the mirror around on them. We can turn the mirror around and look at and pathologize people that routinely buy into whatever the groupthink is. So you get into the ideas of cognitive dissonance. And sociologically, if I believed in a certain conspiracy theory, well, how would that change my life? How would that change my friends? How would it change my interactions, my relationships, my life? So whether or not something is true or probable or at least worthy of research and investigation takes second seat to that idea of, well, what does this mean for me in my life? So there's psychological, there are sociological implications to conspiracy theory and conspiracy theorizing that, again, they cut both ways. What are the conspiracy theorists thinking? What are the followers of the mainstream narrative thinking? Not to necessarily dualize those two things, but just to give you some food for thought here. And another aspect, finally, with diagnosing this section here of conspiracy theory, breaking down the narrative, another aspect is who's funding all of this psychological research? What's the money behind all of this stuff in academia? With the conversation and a lot of the studies that I've seen, there is a lot of big money funding this avenue of research, these ideas. So we've got big government involved in this through the EU with, I mentioned earlier how the EU has a kind of campaign going on about conspiracy theories and how they're dangerous, inspired by that conspiracy theory handbook by Cook and Lewandowski, I believe, are the authors of that. We looked at it in the intro. The UN, of course, has their campaign against conspiracy theories. Big finance, industries, foundations, oligarchy, all of these influences come together to fund academia and fund research and fund science. Science is an interesting. The science gets worked into this discussion too. It's part of the propaganda. They like to pit science against conspiracy theory when really they should work hand in hand, and they can work hand in hand as part of, like research and investigation. But money does corrupt, and in the scientific establishment, we have to tread carefully. We have to follow the scientific method, but we also have to follow motives and money. Okay, so both of those things have to happen at the same time. People say, well, follow the science. No, question the science. Okay, science, first of all, in and of itself, it's always up for debate and discussion. Okay, that's kind of the opposite of the narrative we've been seeing recently. Also, we can't just look at science. We have to look at the context, the sociology of scientific knowledge. SSK is a field that is very important to look at. How do scientific consensuses emerge? How does money play a part of this? How does careerism, doing things to just forward your career, how does that play into it? Normal human motivations are at play at every step of the way. So we have to tread carefully. Okay, so in conclusion, I just want to mention how this kind of labeling really just shuts down a person and shuts down the discussion. When you redefine, identify, and diagnose somebody as a conspiracy theorist and all of the bad things that they lump and dump into that process, the result is just you stop discussion. It turns into kind of an egotistic shouting match. It can very often just lead to, total disrespect. We need to listen to each other. We need to respect each other. Hear what we have to say. Balance listening with speaking and critical thinking. We'll get more to a balanced approach to this at the end of the discussion. But keep in mind, in this current climate, can we really talk about potential threats that one might think is a well-reasoned, well-founded, and well-evidenced conspiracy theory with potentially life-threatening or severely life-altering implications? Can we talk about that? We really can't. Again, the language has been so severely corrupted and charged with negativity that it's very difficult to really talk about potential conflicts. So we need to really dispel, to break down this narrative, and that's what we're doing. We'll continue with the next topic here. All right.